I've been shopping for a Nakamichi 3-head cassette deck for months now, but I've been limiting my search to the popular, well-known CR-3A model. That is, until I stumbled on the BX-300. Wait, what? I didn't even know a Nakamichi BX-300 existed. So I did the smart thing and I bought a broken one on eBay. At least it was listed as 4 parts as is, with the hopes that I could easily get it up and running again and truly see if it is better than the CR-3A. Is all this even possible? I don't know. Let me tell you all about how the BX300 surprised me next. Now, I still love making mixtapes, and I've owned quite a few vintage Nakamichi entry-level decks over the years, including the CR-1A, the BX2, and the BX-100. And it was my love of the CR-1A that got me searching for a CR-3A when I decided that I wanted to upgrade to a 3-head deck. So since I still love recording tapes, I wanted to buy a deck that had a bias control knob, as well as gave me the ability to monitor the playback while I was recording in real time. So when I was searching on eBay and I saw the BX300 had these features, and it was listed for a good price as is for parts, I decided to bite the bullet. I actually just liked it or watched it, whatever you do on eBay, and the seller made me an offer for $279, which after tax and shipping was right around $324. Now, let me tell you word for word exactly what the seller wrote in the description as to what was wrong with the unit. He stated, "I just did a super quick test and put a tape in quick, and the levels, lights both lit up and down, but it seemed that when I went to rewind it, that it didn't want to rewind. It did fast forward, and then it seemed while it was fast forwarding, if you press the rewind, sometimes the rewind would work. I didn't give it much time at all during the quick test. No other testing was done." I love descriptions like this. At least it's better than powered on, no other testing done. That one always drives me crazy. So when I actually read this description, my first thought was that the unit probably just needed a new idler tire. That was my sort of gamble guess. And I actually ordered an idle tire to arrive right around the same time that the deck would. Now, when the deck arrived, I inserted a tape just to see what exactly the issues might be. And everything played fine, at least for a minute, until I heard a horrible crunching sound. I opened the deck and removed the cassette, only to find this. Basically, the tape was eaten by the deck, which isn't uncommon if you haven't used a deck for some time and it just needs an overall good cleaning. So I popped the cover off the door, which is one of my favorite features with Nakamichi. The cover of the door just pops right off and gives you the ability to get right in there and do some cleaning. I cleaned the far right pinch roller, and while I was in there, I just went ahead and cleaned everything else. I inserted the tape back in, and from there, it played fine for quite some time, actually. And the rewind and fast forward functions worked great as well. It was almost like there weren't any issues at all. Now, I do plan on eventually changing out the idler tire, and when I do so, I'll be sure to make a video so I can post it here for everyone to watch in the event that you also need to change the idler tire. But for now, I think I'm just going to let it go as long as it will last. But like all great vintage gear, and anytime I think something is working just great, I actually got the deck out this morning before making this video, was listening to tapes, and after about 20-25 minutes worth of play, it would suddenly stop working. Now, anyone familiar with Nakamichi decks knows that there is a common cam motor issue with these, where there is a dead spot that basically once the motor hits that dead spot, it just stops. And that was actually my worst fear when I bought this deck, that would be the issue, because there's kind of 2 ways to go about it. You can spray deoxit in a tiny little hole in the motor and hope that it cleans it out. I've not had the best luck with that on other decks. The other is to actually have to physically get in there, pull the motor out, take everything apart, and clean everything out so that it works properly, which is much more labor intensive. So I'm hoping that that's not actually going to be the issue with this deck, because there is the small chance that it's just that back tension belt that you can actually see sitting right next to the idler tire. Now, that may be a little bit loose, which is just causing the tape to sort of bunch up a little bit. It doesn't eat the tape, it just kind of bunches up, and that's when it stops. So I'm hoping to replace that and have everything working properly again, and that it doesn't turn into be a major motor issue. So let me know what you think in the comments below, especially if you've had any experience with the BX300 deck. Do you think I'm gonna have to get in there and clean that motor out, which I'm really hoping I don't have to do, or could it just be as simple as the back tension belt? That's what I'm hoping for, and that's what I'll try first before getting in the motor. But if you have any experience with these decks and want to leave me a comment below, giving me some advice, I would absolutely appreciate that. But to that point, before this issue popped up, I actually listened to this deck for 3 weeks or more, maybe even close to a month, and everything was awesome. So let me tell you about all the features that I really love about this deck while I was using it. As I mentioned at the beginning, this deck has 3 heads. One for racing, one for recording, and one for playback. One of my favorite features on this unit is the monitor switch, which means that when engaged, I can actually A/B the recording to the source. So I can hear what the source sounds like, and then I can switch over and be able to listen to the recording and see how closely it sounds to the original source. I've made a lot of cassette recordings over the years, and when I was using entry-level budget decks, especially like college or high school, and then I would play them back, I would just sort of be like, oh man, I put all that effort into that tape and it just doesn't sound good. Well, the great news is with this switch, I can switch back and forth and make sure that what I'm hearing will meet my expectations. Also, this deck has a bias tune knob, which just gives me the ability to further tweak my recordings to make sure they sound the best possible. Now, a lot of high-end, expensive decks come with an auto bias tune function, which I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm really jealous of, but I just can't afford a model with that option yet. So for now, at least this gives me the ability to tweak my recordings to get the best sound possible. This unit also comes with a pitch control knob, which allows you to adjust the speed during playback, which by the way is something the CR-1A does not offer at all. Another feature offered on the BX300 is a pressure pad lifter, which this is how the operation is described in the Nakamichi manual. When tape is held against the playback head, a small protruding boss pushes the cassette's internal pressure pad back out of contact with the tape, which eliminates scrape flutter and modulation noise. Now, when it comes to the design of this deck, a lot of people do not like the sliding features for the recording input levels and the output level. The CR series uses knobs instead of these sliders, and a lot of people prefer that. To be honest, I probably would prefer the knobs as well, but I really don't mind the sliders so much on the BX300. Now, similar to a lot of Nakamichi decks, the BX300 has the tape selector buttons on the far right side of the unit. So you want to make sure you are inputting the correct tape type before you record with a tape to make sure you're getting that matched for the best recording possible. Also, this deck has 2 Dolby options, both B and C. Now you'll notice on the front of this unit that there are 2 pieces of tape, one being really obvious with the 3190 right there covering up the meters, and another is a number 2 that's right up underneath the headphone jack. I always like to imagine a little bit about what the history of these units are before they arrive to me, and that tape makes me wonder if this was maybe used in tandem with another Nakamichi deck somewhere. But most importantly, now that I made these videos, I can get busy on removing the tape and all the gunk that's going to come with it from the front of this unit. Now, outside of this most recent stopping issue that I've had as of this morning, I have been using this deck for the last 3 or so weeks within my system and have really loved the playback. But I also wanted to get an idea of just how well it recorded. So my first attempt at recording was recording an LP version of Hum's classic album, Downward is Heavenward. Now this album is chock full of guitars and keyboards and just lots, really big, thick sound. But if you listen carefully, you can kind of hear all these interesting things that kind of stick out amongst all that big sound. And I was curious if the BX300 would be able to capture those sounds as well. And it actually did. Again, I love this monitor switch because I can go back and forth while I'm making a recording to make sure that the recording is as close to the source as possible. So I grabbed a great Type 2 tape and made this recording, and it turned out awesome. All those things that I could hear on the vinyl LP, I was able to hear with the cassette recording with the BX-300. When then I started goofing around and just grabbed my iPad and Apple Music and made a cassette recording of Smashing Pumpkins' Siamese Dream, another album with a lot going on, to see if the BX-300 would be able to pick those things up. Now, I know it's kind of goofy to make a recording from an iPad using Apple Music, but I was just having fun and wanted a quick and easy source just to give the BX-300 a nice test. And it passed with flying colors, just like recording vinyl from the Hum LP. Everything sounded great. All the things that I was hoping to hear from the source were there in the recording, and I couldn't have been happier. Now, this also means, in general, the playback of my regular cassettes, even commercially released albums, sound great with the BX-300. I just think that Nakamichi decks have a certain sound that I prefer over decks that I've owned by Sony and Denon. There just seems to be a little bit more space in the playback, and I'm able to hear interesting things in the upper frequencies, and the bass has always sounded great as well. So again, just like the lower Nakamichi decks that I've had, whether it's the CR-1A or the BX-100, the BX-300 was right there with it and absolutely sounded awesome. But how does it sound compared to a CR-3A? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I actually found, not long after I bought the BX-300, I found a broken CR-3A locally on Facebook Market. Now, the person was originally selling it for $500 and had marked it down to $250, which was much more in my price range. And they had told me that it would need a new belt, and you just never know with cassette decks if that's actually truly the case. But when I popped the top, I found a completely broken, gooey, gross belt on the inside. So I've yet to get that belt on order and replace it. But the good news is, when I do, I'll make a video and post that here. Then once I have the belt in the CR-3A, and provided there's no other issues with it, we'll make a sound comparison between that deck and the BX-300. But overall, I'm just shocked that I didn't even know a BX-300 even existed. What rock have I been living under? I'm also relieved that this unit that I bought was, at least at first, a pretty easy fix with just some general cleaning and maintenance. There's obviously some more things that I'll have to address down the road, but that's the beauty of vintage gear. Just when you think you got something working, something else goes wrong. But for the 3 weeks or so when I had this in my system and it was playing without this sort of automatic stopping issue, everything sounded awesome, and I was so excited that I decided to take a chance on this rather than the CR-3A. Now, as I mentioned at the start of this video, the main reason I was even shopping for the CR-3A was because of how much I love the CR-1A. If you're interested in learning more about that model, you can do so by watching this video here.